I don't know if I would agree with this article or not, but obviously, when it comes to Joe Biden, he's a little bit better when it comes to being on the world stage than any president, and they're comparing him to George H.W. Bush, who was kind of prepared in a way because you got to look at politics and how long they've been in there. Um, Joe Biden has had more foreign policy experience than any other president in U.S. history, but when he entered the Senate and began dealing with global issues, it was 1973, and Leonid I'm not sure if I'm saying the name right. Leonid Brezhnev was chairman of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. The previous most experienced among our presidents when it came to foreign policy was George H.W. Bush, and add up his time in Congress as ambassador to the United Nations and head of the U.S. liaison office in China, and being head of the CIA and vice president, Bush became president with 17 years of foreign policy experience. That is a third of the foreign policy experience that Biden has had. It is probably unfair to compare Biden's early performance to the first months of the squatter Donald Trump. Donald Trump being the only squatter in U.S. history to have had zero public service experience of any kind before he took office at all. In fact, it's probably unfair to compare him with any of his predecessors, since the senior, which means the father Bush, former Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton, former Texas Governor George W. Bush, and freshman Senator Barack Obama all came into office with little or no international affairs experience, and that all showed. Um, George W. Bush oversaw the beginning of the worst foreign policy calamity in U.S. history, the unwarranted and disastrous U.S. invasion of Iraq. And as hard as it is to imagine, his decisions in the global arena were even worse than what Trump did. Clinton's first-term foreign policy fumbles ranged from the Black Hawk Down incident in Somalia and failing to act swiftly enough to stem the genocide in Rwanda, to unsteadily handling the first challenges posed by the Balkan War, and a misguided, overly optimistic view of the post-Soviet Russia. The U.S. intervention in Haiti backed the wrong horse. Jean Bertrand Aristide, his Iraq policy was muddled, and the Oslo Accord between Israel and the Palestinians in the end did not work. And people say this when they were former members of the Clinton administration. Obama, who was awarded a Nobel Peace Prize, um, gave some uplifting speeches in the early days of his administration, promising a different view toward the Arab world and an end to nuclear weapons. Ultimately, reality did not live up to his vision. He pledged to get out of Iraq and Afghanistan, and he did fail at both of those. But for example, in Afghanistan, he ignored the advice of his then Vice President Joe Biden, and bought into a surge strategy that did not work at all. He did reset with Russia, and he proposed during an early visit to Moscow flopped. By virtue of his long experience, Biden's first months in office had been far more successful than Trump's, but he rapidly put together a respected team of foreign policy veterans. He quickly undid Trump policy errors, like bringing America back into the international groups like the World Health Organization and the international accords like the Paris Agreement. But when crises erupted in places like Ukraine and between the Israelis and Palestinians, he intervened with a sure touch and helped avert the escalation. Biden's recent trip to Europe is among the most successful for a new president. He launched a refresh of the Atlantic Charter with the United Kingdom. He re-engaged the group of 7 industrialized countries and played a leading role in an unprecedented commitment of vaccines to needy nations. He led an effort to reshape NATO priorities, and he got agreement to cite both Chinese and Russian threats, and reasserted America's absolute commitment to the Article 5, the NATO members' principle of collective protection in the event of an attack. At a summit with European Union leaders, a major trade issue was resolved, and a long list of new initiatives was undertaken. In a meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin, Biden laid out America's concerns. He underscored our resolve in standing up to future Russian abuses. He helped usher in a new focus on cybersecurity threats, and he sought areas of potential cooperation, such as restarting the Iran nuclear deal. That is why, of all the presidents across the past 32 years, the only one to which Biden can fairly be compared to is George H.W. Bush. The Eastern and Central Europe were in the midst of a deep unrest when Bush took office. His first 2 years saw an unprecedented wave of revolutions and ultimately led to the fall of the Berlin Wall in November of '89. And shortly after the end of the Soviet Union, the Tiananmen uprising came that summer in Beijing. As effective and well-managed diplomacy was required to usher in what became known as the New World Order. Bush's experienced team showed it was up to the task, but not only in how it handled the end of the Cold War, but also with its operation of the Operation Desert Shield. The administration accomplished its goal of driving Iraq out of Kuwait, and it did not prolong the war to destabilize the Middle East by going after Saddam Hussein. Leaving Geneva last week, Biden dismissed the idea that the foreign policy is a great skill that somehow is sort of like a secret code. He argued that it was a logical extension of personal relationships, and it's the way human nature functions. While he was certainly right about that, he downplayed another fact: in complex affairs of state, experience does matter. And Biden's record stands the test of time, and perhaps his and Bush's relative success, contrasted with the struggles of less experienced presidents, will put an end to the notion that on-the-job training is adequate for the toughest job in the world.